who I think have come around to recognizing that actually, national self-determination and having democratic accountability, it's not really xenophobic, it's certainly not racist, and you can be internationalist and cosmopolitan and a self-governing country.
What were the reasons for the success of the Brexit campaign, and what lessons can we in South Africa take from this experience? In this extract from a longer conversation on my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara, I spoke with Douglas Carswell, a former Member of Parliament in the UK and a key architect of the Leave campaign. If you enjoy this analysis, you might want to check out the full conversation with Douglas Carswell on my podcast. That's linked in the description below. So Douglas, could you take us back to the start of the Brexit campaign? Because I mean, you, amongst a handful of others, were early advocates of it. How did you manage to take Brexit from this relatively fringe issue into this huge kind of tidal wave of public opinion that it eventually became?
Well, the first thing is when we had this idea that, for the reasons we've been discussing, the European Union was a disaster. The first, and it seems obvious now, but the first thing we had to do is to work out what should our objective be. And we toyed with the idea of going for a referendum. And that seems obvious now, but it wasn't obvious at the time. There was some discussion as to whether or not we should try to use the vehicle of a parliamentary majority. But it became obvious that actually the only way that you could overcome the inert establishment in Britain, which was wedded to its lazy idea of EU membership, the only way you could challenge that would be through the mechanism of a referendum. So about 20 years ago, we started to try to normalize and popularize the notion that you should have referendums on European questions. And this was considered very extreme at the time. In 2005, when I got elected to the House of Commons, I was one of only 7 members of Parliament. There's 650 MPs. I was one of only 7 who believed in Britain leaving the European Union and was prepared to say so publicly. Today, you'll find many, many politicians in Britain who will explain cheerfully how they've always been a Brexiteer, and they'll be quick to tell you it was their idea. And it's wonderful that they think that. I can't remember meeting that many of them in 2005. In fact, I remember a very significant moment in, I think it was probably about 2012, when Boris Johnson, who was then Mayor of London, if I remember correctly, signed our petition calling for an in-out referendum. And this was considered very, very sort of avant-garde. Of course, he didn't say which way he would vote in that referendum, but the idea of popularizing the idea that we should have a referendum was a very difficult battle to have.
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from the CIA.
And we needed to find a way of popularizing the argument. And so this idea that we ran on during the referendum campaign is take back control. There's a sense, I think, in Britain that EU membership means a small elite that you can't hold to account, decides things for you. So we tapped into this notion of take back control of immigration, take back control of our foreign policy, take back control over our regulatory policy. And that really resonated. And it resonated with people who might not be traditional Eurosceptics, who might not, particularly be particularly excited or vexed about immigration policy or whatever it was. We had to find a way of reaching out beyond our base of committed Eurosceptics. And so we put a great deal of effort into testing, message testing, focus group testing, public opinion, working out what people felt, what messages resonated, and beginning to create arguments that appealed to undecided voters and voters who had sort of opted out of the democratic process altogether, and how could we reconnect with them and persuade them? And that was really our big challenge. There are a lot of people in the British Conservative Party who still think of Brexit as being primarily a conversation amongst British Conservatives. If it was a conversation primarily amongst British Conservatives, we would still be in the European Union. We made it a conversation that people outside the British Conservative Party felt that they were part of. It was difficult, but we did it, and I'm pleased with the outcome. I think there are an awful lot of people in Britain today who probably would have been vociferously against Brexit a couple of years ago, certainly 4 or 5 years ago, who I think have come around to recognizing that actually, national self-determination and having democratic accountability, it's not really xenophobic, it's certainly not racist, and you can be internationalist and cosmopolitan and a self-governing country. And I think we're beginning to see some long overdue movement on that.
And it seemed, looking at the results in 2016, that there was just this enormous group of about 2 million or so people who had been completely disconnected from normal political processes, were disaffected with the establishment parties, both Conservative, Labour, and others, but who were somehow mobilized. How do you think that group of people was triggered to come out and vote leave? Well,
I have a bit of involvement in that very issue. In order to force a referendum, I had to, for the benefit of your viewers and listeners, I had to resign from the Conservative Party to trigger a by-election, a special election, and join UKIP, the overtly Eurosceptic party. And for reasons I won't bore your listeners with, I had to do this in order to put the issue of the referendum centre stage in British politics. It was a high-risk move. No member of Parliament had ever resigned and triggered a by-election when they changed parties in at least 50 years, and succeeded. And so it was a high-stakes gamble that I took. But in fighting that by-election to get back into Parliament, I was counting on a district in my Essex constituency called Jaywick. It was officially the poorest place in England, the poorest parish in England. Some homes have 60% of people in those homes living on some form of public welfare. It had an extraordinarily low rate of turnout in local and national elections over many, many years. But I realized that it had a large number of people who were very dissatisfied with the way the political elite, both nationally and locally, operated. And I thought to myself, if I could tap into that, if I could mobilize these people who don't normally vote, but are registered voters, to show up, I could win. And that's basically what my by-election was about doing. It was about galvanizing and mobilizing people that the mainstream political process couldn't even see. They'd given up on. They weren't even, because they didn't traditionally vote, they weren't even on the radar screen of the established parties. So we put a great deal of effort in that by-election into tapping into those people. And we won that by-election by a historic landslide. I think it was one of the largest swings to any party in any election in British electoral history, because we got out a cohort of voters who didn't normally vote. And that was really the test run for the referendum. If we could do that on a national scale, if we could replicate what we've done in Essex on a national scale, we could win the referendum. And so the by-election in 2014 in Clacton was, in a way, a test run for the referendum. How do we mobilize the forgotten voters? Now, ever since the referendum, I've had lots of journalists explaining to me why Vote Leave won. I'm happy for them to explain to me why Vote Leave won. Many of these political pundits couldn't even see what was in front of them for many, many years of political reporting. We won because we mobilized people that, frankly, mainstream political journalists don't even know exist. As a very famous political strategist put it to me in the run-up to the referendum, we were trying to get the votes of people who mainstream politicians only met when they collected their dry cleaning.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this discussion, you might want to check out the full conversation with Douglas Carswell. That's linked over here. I'd also be grateful if you could subscribe to my other channel. That's linked over here. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And until next time, take care.